Hi, this is Brandy Shantz, and you're listening to Living Chronic. Today I'm speaking with Ohan, the money doctor, and I'm really excited that he's on today because, of course, financial planning is one of the most important things you can do as a chronically ill patient. So, welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Brandy, for having me in this show. And just with the name for our listeners, Ohan, the money doctor, I choose just because I have PhD and I wanted to stand out in that sense. But your listeners, of course, can find me under Ohan, the money doctor, also my name. And thank you for having me in this very important episode.
So, let's get started because I have so many questions. I've found that planning financially has been one of the most important things that I do in my life now because frankly we live a little bit differently than the rest of healthy America, even healthy world in many situations. So what's some of the first bit of advice you would give to somebody who's trying to put together a good plan?
Great, and I'll answer that question. Just to disclose to our listeners, everything that we talk today is for educational purposes only. So this is not financial, investment, tax, or legal advice. I'm not an attorney. Everything I talk, it will involve some legal jargon, which I'll try to explain in simple English. But I will definitely encourage everyone, in case you decide to do any of the ideas or suggestions that we discussed today, advise with a legal counsel or attorney. And when I was thinking about today's episode, and it is unfortunate, of course, we will talk some events that can be a little bit saddening or a little bit not usual conversations that you will have every day, but they are very important conversations to have. You better be ready so you don't get ready. And what I mean by that, okay, in times I mentioned that having a bad plan is better than not having any plan. And I came up with certain ideas that I would love to share with you to answer your question. And in the end, I'll give you some tips as well. First thing came to my mind, I wanted to discuss will, which is last will and testament. In many cases, it is called. A will states who assumes ownership of your assets and belongings after that person dies. And if you don't write a will, your assets are distributed according to the state law that you are residing. In many cases, it is called intestacy laws. And it
Mhm.
can go to something called probate, which can be a little bit expensive, if not much expensive, because lots of attorneys get involved, of course, government fees and everything. So will is one thing that I will suggest our listeners to consider. In the will, you will also choose an executor. This is the person who will make sure that the terms of your will are carried out exactly as you want. So it should be someone you trust, someone you are, in a sense, have similar values as well.
Mhm.
And in case our listeners have children who are younger than 18 years old, in the will, they will be able to appoint guardians for their children.
Mhm.
And guardians, in case parents die prior kids becoming an adult, guardians are the ones who will take control over your assets in a sense, and also like your wishes, how you want your kids, let's say, to go to school, or what you want to them study, how to contribute the funds that you might have for them. So, to summarize, will is good document for you to manage your belongings after something happens to you, but also in the meantime, you can appoint guardians in the will in case, God forbid, something happens to you and your loved ones prior your kids become adults. This is first document I wanted to bring up to our
Mhm.
listeners' attention.
And
Any
I should
questions?
as
Yes.
a non-human mom, I am the mom of three fur babies. I have included them as well. I learned it's very
You see?
important to ask people who's willing to take your babies, your fur babies, if you go, because unfortunately there are a lot of senior dogs who are in shelters largely because their owner died and no family member would step up to take care of them. So actually finding somebody to take care of your pets is
It's
also
very
a
important.
good plan.
You see, like in case of pets, and the same applies to children, you should find someone who you have common values with. Because if that person is not, let's say, dog or cat person, it will be really hard to point them to guardians because they will learn what means an owner of the cat or the dog, which is in many cases, even in my opinion, harder than dealing with the children who can be already conscious and they can make their own decisions. But it's very
Mhm.
important. One thing I want to mention about will is that it does not control distribution of all your assets. And I'll mention what I mean by this. If let's say you have a bank account or brokerage account or insurance, in that case you can appoint a beneficiary on this type of accounts. These are the people who will benefit from that account in case again something happens to you. But will is just basic document, and I'll
Mhm.
talk about alternative to will, which in many cases can be something called living trust. And with
Right.
living trust, trust usually can be two. We can separate in two different types. One is revocable, which means you can change the terms of the trust, and another one is irrevocable, which means you kind of set it on a stone, so you cannot make changes on that. And again, like I will highly encourage to talk to a professional before making any decision. But with living trust, the nice part about it, you appoint a trustee. And by the way, you can be trustee while you are alive. I always love to mention that trust will help you to manage your assets while you are alive and post-mortem, again, when something happens to you. And with trust, you appoint trustee, and you yourself and your loved one can be a current trustee, and you have a successor trustee in case something happens to you who will manage the assets. And in that case, you just need to make sure, let's say you own a house, in case you want the house owned by the trust, so in the future date, the successor trustee will be able to manage the house. Make sure that the title is now owned by the trust, and you are the owner of the trust. Technically, you own the same way your assets, and you can use them, but they are parked in this trust. So with trust, also there is something called pour over will. In case you forgot to put something in the trust, so at the end it will be easier for them to bring to the trust. And what trust will do for you, again, you will avoid something called probate, which is a court process usually. In many cases, it can take, in reality, 30 to 40% of your assets. It can go to legal fees, and sometimes disputes can happen. But with the trust, if it is written in an appropriate way, you will avoid the probate. Plus, trusts are private, so it is not public information such as probate is. So it is
Right.
about privacy as well. So something to consider for our listeners is living trust. And for many people, another important document is power of attorney. Should
Yes,
we discuss a little bit about what are the
absolutely.
different types? So power of attorney, again, it comes in different types and shapes. And the general power of attorney, usually, you are appointing someone to manage your assets. It can be alongside with you, so it is not necessarily that you are incapacitated or anything. Let's say you are out of city or out of country and you want to do certain transactions, so you can appoint someone power of attorney to handle, let's say, your financial matters. There is a power of attorney type called durable power of attorney, which you can have a wording that in case you become incapacitated, the power of attorney will stay in force. Because in many cases, general power of attorney becomes nothing when the person becomes incapacitated. So they can manage the assets while the person can make their own decision. But unfortunately, there are many situations when, and again, unfortunate things happen. We use this word a lot today, but unfortunate things happen, and that person is unable to make decisions. with durable power of attorney, still that power of attorney will be in effect for that person who you appoint as power of attorney. In order for you, on behalf of you, to make decisions, it can apply to your health, it can apply to your finances. It is
Mhm.
important to have this verbiage in your power of attorney document. Usually, power of attorney document, eh, not usually, in many cases, regardless of what type you choose, when person dies, the power of
Mhm.
attorney is, how to say, terminated. So
Right.
it's important. There is another document comes to my mind which I wanted to bring up when I talk about power of attorney, and I'm sorry it is not becoming more of a like conversation type of thing. I have certain things I wanted to
No,
mention to
it's
our
such
listeners.
so important to really learn these things. As difficult as they are to talk about, it's
Correct.
one of the most important things you do.
Because emotions are involved, and
Yes.
overall in finance in general, we think that it is about numbers, but it is in a sense, but it's only 20%. The
Yes.
80% are emotions that are come
Mhm.
to finance. And imagine if you don't have these documents in place, unfortunately some fights, some arguments, and in many cases even families don't talk to each other because of
Right.
these documents are not properly um, drafted or managed. And in many cases people have more than one child, and they don't get, so to say, equal shares of the assets or estate, and then it can become a problem. So it's better for you to think about all this stuff prior, in advance.
Mhm.
Another document I wanted to bring our listeners' attention is called Advanced Healthcare Directive. In
Mhm.
many cases, it is called Living Will as well. So don't confuse with Living Trust. This is called Living Will. But the Advanced Care Directive is a document that states what your wishes are for medical and end of life care, should you be
Mhm.
unable to make these decisions for yourself. And it can be, in majority of cases it is two different types. In general, one is healthcare power of attorney, which appoints someone to make decisions if you are unable to, best if the person understands your values and wishes again. And
Right.
another one is a living will or advanced directive, which is used by healthcare professionals as a guide to your wishes for end of life medical care. Because there are people that, let's say, they don't want certain procedures to be made on them, or they want certain procedures. So how to make this decision if you are uh, incapable of making them? This is where this health directive comes in place. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask before I jump to some tips that I have for our listeners as well, that they can at least manage their finances while they are able to.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you brought up some of the more difficult things first, because all of these things are very important. Durable power of attorney. It's not uncommon for someone who's living chronic to be incapacitated for a period of time. Maybe we're in the hospital for a long duration. We're having quite a few surgeries. I know I've had to have those difficult conversations with my husband, and he knows, we made these decisions together. And I think, kind of part of that emotional side is sitting down with your loved ones and, just having that time to do the difficult things, say the difficult things, and have a conversation about how you feel about that end of life and what you want to happen should things take certain turns. And
Absolutely.
it's just such an important topic. And I really love that we're doing this also at Breast Cancer Awareness Month. I know
Oh,
so many
yes.
women who have gone through that struggle dealing with breast cancer. And fortunately for me and them, all of my friends have survived. And that's just so wonderful. But they've used these very tools to get through a very difficult time in their life. So this is, not just for people living chronic with, a lot of people who listen are dealing with autoimmune disorders, um, chronic pain, things of that nature. Breast cancer is a very real thing, and it's something that we're talking about this month, especially. So I'm glad that we got to touch on that in a very specific way.
Randy, and when I was getting ready for this episode, knowing the theme and overall, what is your vision and values for your podcast as well, I wanted to touch a little bit about health insurance also in the United States. Health
Hmm.
insurance, we always talk that unfortunately in America, with all the pros and cons, this is the greatest country on earth, but our health system, it is called to be broken in a
Yeah.
sense that unfortunately for many people cannot afford to have the health care that they deserve and they need because of their income situation or family situation. And when I was researching, I came up with something I want to mention for our listeners, specifically the ones who are employees, who are working for some company. And I did realize people are not aware of about something called medical expense reimbursement plans.
Yeah.
In many cases, it is called MERP for short. But this is type of health reimbursement arrangement that enables employers to fund portion of their employees' health plan. It can be they pay some portion of deductible or co-insurance or co-payment. But I can tell on from my own experience when I was working for a major bank prior started my venture as a money coach, we had something called health reimbursement arrangement, HRA type of account attached to our health insurance, where you do certain activities, and that they can be some activities, let's say for your fitness, or some activities just to bring you awareness. So it can be some videos you are going to watch online, and you are earning certain dollars or points, so you can use these money again to to make it easier on you when it comes to your household budget, to pay your co-insurance, your co-payments, your deductibles. So it's very important for our listeners to ask their employers if they have any type of reimbursement arrangement that they can participate. Because unfortunately, I see in many cases, we get the job and we think about how much hourly I'm going to get paid or how much annually I'm going to get paid. And we forget to check overall like benefits that your employer is providing. A similar thing is 401k. In case of 401k employer match, many people don't ask this question. So I will encourage our listeners to ask their employers if they have any type of reimbursement arrangements. And also, another point I wanted to bring up, it's about something called a secondary insurance, because there are people who have more than one insurance. Let's say
Hmm.
they are a married couple or they are partners and they both work for employers, separate employers, and both employers offer health insurance, but they are not necessarily overlapping to each other. This is a very important point, because in many cases, if you sign up for two types of insurance, it means you are paying more on your premiums monthly. And in many cases, if the services are overlap, then you have something to think about. Do you really need second insurance? But if you have the opportunity to have second insurance, which again, like usually, like how it happens, your primary insurance gets the claim or the bill, then they cover with everything that they have in their contract for you to cover, then it goes to your secondary insurance. But there are, interesting enough, many people who have two insurances. So I wanted to bring up some pros for secondary insurance. You can receive more coverage and
Hmm.
benefits, especially if two plans are complementary, so they don't overlap on each other. Also, like, it can reduce your overall out-of-pocket cost because the second insurance will cover some of the expenses. And there are, of course, some disadvantages of having a secondary insurance. Again, if the services are overlap, but you are paying double premium, so in many cases it doesn't make sense for you to have that secondary insurance.
Hmm.
Also, like in many cases, the coordination of benefits can be called complicated. Okay, I have two insurance, which one I should claim? But usually, like your primary insurance will get the first one.
Yeah.
These are things that I will encourage. Insurance is a contract. in the end of the day. So I will encourage our listeners to check their contract to understand and ask questions, because in many cases it can be complicated verbiage when it comes to insurance. But HR of your employer, human resources services, or also in many cases online, employers give information for you to educate yourself. It's very important to know what you are getting with any type of insurance. But I wanted to bring these to our listeners' attention as well.
It's been my experience because I do have multiple insurance plans. I'm covered under the Veterans Affairs medical plan, so I can, as a matter of fact, I actually get the majority of my care at the VA because it's so good now. But I also have
Right.
TRICARE, so I can use TRICARE. And in my experience, where it's been very helpful is with the specialist shortages. So depending on your particular illness, mine being Crohn's disease is my primary illness. There's a shortage of GI doctors. And it's really hard to find a second opinion sometimes. I could not get into a doctor for so long after I had my reaction. I wanted to see a new doctor. This doctor had allowed me to go 19 months having a serious reaction to a drug he prescribed, and I could not get in with anyone else. I was able to get in with the VA and saw a really great
Mm,
GI there. But when you do
yes.
have multiple insurances, especially for those of us with a government insurance, now the VA is just surprisingly amazing these days. But many people who have TRICARE or Medicare or something of that nature, having some sort of I actually don't think you can you have a secondary on Medicare? I don't know, but I know a lot of people on TRICARE will have two insurances because not every doctor accepts TRICARE because the reimbursement is not very high.
I'm not aware of the TRICARE, to be honest with you. I was mainly talking about private insurance in
Yeah.
combination of some type of, because in many cases, for example, I can talk on in California, if an individual or a household cannot afford to have a private insurance, which is usually bought through marketplace, then yes, state gives them something called Medi-Cal in case of California. But when you have income and you disqualify for government insurance, you go to marketplace and you can buy insurance. And that is the time when many options coming into place. And imagine if someone goes and buys from marketplace, but they have a partner or loved one who has an employer, they offer insurance as well. This is more of a like secondary I was talking about, or as you mentioned in your case of going through VA health coverages. So it is something that you should just ask your employer in many cases, and in case you don't have an employer, you are self-employed, you need to do through a marketplace. Again, there are lines there for customer service, and nowadays you can also chat with someone and ask all these questions, but make sure you understand what you are getting in. So in
Mhm.
case that unfortunate situation comes up that you need to see a doctor, you have enough coverage. Otherwise medical expenses can be devastating. I
Yes.
know, unfortunately, so many people who didn't have proper insurance coverage, and their bills were so big and that they forced to file a bankruptcy in many cases as well. And then even the situation with collections, it is not like pleasure, in addition to health issues that person is having. I also prepare some tips that I want to share with our listeners today, um, for them at least to have these documents and information ready for them. The first one is proof of identity documents, which can be mainly paperwork. It can be your social security card, your birth certificate, marriage certificate, in case there was a divorce certificate, prenup agreements in case they are in place. So these are documents that I will highly suggest to have in one place in case you need it, or again, you appoint someone as an executor or successor trustee. So it will be easier for them to find these documents. And in many cases, it is advisable to put in a bank safe deposit box. And again, this is something you also need to have someone trustworthy, maybe to along with you to have access. And by the way, many of these things like executors or trustees, you can change anytime because life is moving on. And in many cases, when money involved or assets involved, unfortunately, people can change their I don't want to call the phase, but they can change their attitude towards you. So make sure that you do all this with someone you trust. Another important tip, in my opinion, to make sure that the titles for your properties or deeds are appropriately named. So in case you have a trust and you want everything for your trustee to manage for you, then it is reasonable for your property also to be under the trust. Again, these are
Mhm.
some questions that it applies not applies to everyone. That's why it is called personal finance. So it is individual for everyone's situation. But make sure that the titles on your property and your assets are again appropriate, and on your accounts as well. In many cases, bank or brokerage accounts also like titled the way that you want it to be titled. Nowadays, with this internet and digital world that we are living with, also there is something called digital account logins and passwords. This is also information, especially someone like you are, Brandy, or in my case, also like I have some digital assets that, God forbid, something happens to us, who you want to be named as an executor for your digital assets that you have, because in average, interesting now, when I was doing my research for this episode, I came across two statistics which are a little bit unbelievable, that people under age 70 have more than 160 digital accounts. It
Oh,
can be
wow.
your Imagine, it can be your social media accounts, it can be mm, Netflix, Hulu, it's all these
Mhm.
different sort of accounts. And considering utilizing a password manager type of thing or digital vault to assist you managing them will be a good idea. But also, you should have something called digital executor who will
Mhm.
oversee, cancel certain digital accounts that you have, because they can be something that you are making payment for, or it can be, let's say, your videos or post podcast episodes that you have, and you want someone to be able to manage it after, again, something happens to you. And the unfortunate part, which we cannot avoid, there is this quote which I will paraphrase. If I'm not mistaken, it is from Benjamin Franklin, that there are two things are certain: taxes and death. And
Yes.
unfortunately, we'll not avoid the death, and we better talk right now, as you mentioned, regardless of how uncomfortable it can be. But there is something called funeral instructions and wishes, which
Yeah.
is usually like not a legal document, but again, you can have some type of paperwork for your wishes, how you would like to be buried, and mem they call it memorialized, I believe. Memorialized, and also included in the text, like the way that you want, maybe certain traditions that come from your culture that you would like for that executor or whoever will take care of the situation to be aware of. But these are in general like the documents and the tasks that I will encourage everyone to think about, at least to think about. And why I mentioned to think about, because finance and financial planning in general is a foreign language for many people. And as any with any foreign language, let's say I want to go to live in China or in Latin America, then I need to learn Chinese or Spanish or Portuguese in many cases, but it will take time for me to learn. So I need to practice. I will suggest our listeners at least to listen all these different topics that we
Mhm.
discussed today, and keep in mind that this was not financial, legal, investment, or tax advice. I will encourage you to do your own research, but think
Yeah.
about all these documents. And nowadays, more than ever, resources are available online. Just make sure that you are getting your information from trusted
Mhm.
sources.
Yes, definitely. The planning, I think, is, once you realize that you have to do these very difficult things. It's the most important thing to keep your life together. And I always say, I wish I had known 10 years before I became ill that I would. Unfortunately, it never really happens that way. So, I myself was scrambling, I had a lot of fortunate positions. My husband works and, makes enough money that, even if I can't work, we're not going to die. Um, and I had a lot of money in savings, but I still was caught unaware and I did not have those documents together. I wasn't sure, what to do. What if I'm in the hospital and I can't make decisions? I was having difficulty getting to work and I had student loans that were just sitting there from my glorious MBA. So these were all decisions I had to make. What do I do? What do you do with the student loans? What do you do for planning? What happens if, things don't turn out well for me? So I think, when I talk about, what do you wish you knew when you were first diagnosed? I think financial planning is probably in my top five because it was so
And
difficult to learn.
and you know what comes to my mind? Insurance is very important. Of course, there are some insurances that I'm not big fan of for, because you again need to know like what is your expense and what are the benefits you are getting from it. But when it comes to simple as car insurance that is mandatory in majority, if not all states, or health insurance, in times we pay these premiums and we think like, oh, these expenses I'm making and I'm not using it. But as you mentioned, you never know when the unfortunate will come. And just to, again, to be ready, not to get ready, is the right approach to all these different subjects.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Pleasure.
This has been really informative and helpful. And I'm so glad that our listeners got to learn so much today about planning ahead.
Thank you. And in case our listeners want to stay in touch with me, I do have a webpage called ohanthemoneydoctor.com. So they can go there, and I have a free resource if they want to download, which will help them with the first 3 steps. In case majority of the topics that I'm discussing are investment related, it will help them to get ready to become an
Mhm.
investor instead of just being a consumer. I will encourage to stay in touch.
And, for a plug, if you can, and again, it's about planning. Let me tell you, for the sick people, listen to me. Having a plan, investing, and finding a way to have passive income is so smart because you just never know when you're going to be, on the, short-term disability or having difficulty getting to work. So the investment side, find a way to get some passive income. It is definitely the smartest thing you can do as a
Crucial.
sick person.
Yes,
So
indeed. Thank you.
So I'm sure to have your information in the episode notes. Thank you again so much. You've been listening to Living Chronic. Thank you again.
Thank you.